Welcome to Really American. I am Michael Hayne. As Trumpty-Dumpty's campaign continues to spiral out of control, especially following that despicable display in Arlington Cemetery, which we see J.D. Vance dancing around and, being all weird as he tries to defend it and just awkward and terrible. Vice President Kamala Harris and Coach Walz are now kicking off a 2-day bus tour throughout the state of Georgia, including many southern rural parts in the state, which will ultimately conclude with a massive rally in Savannah, Georgia. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Savannah, Georgia, but it's an amazing place. Very spooky, artistic, and cool. Anyway, this is going to cause Cheeto Mussolini to have yet another breakdown.
So tell me, how do you feel about Kamala Harris coming to town?
Exuberant, just elated that this community is going to have a first-hand contact with this incredible person who is, I'm going to cry. I am so happy that a woman may be in charge, and a very capable woman with integrity.
On an unrelated note, isn't it just nice and refreshing to see normal, well-adjusted human beings as opposed to this deranged, mentally deficient, my family tree is a circle, carnival-esque maggot trash? And that's what that's what Coach Walz brings. He's just such an easily relatable, midwestern dad that America so desperately needs right now. Right here, he just looks like he runs a bed and breakfast and will wake up extra early to leave muffins by your bedside and then tell you about the Civil War and everything. But that's just what Coach Walz brings. Actually, it's interesting that both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are set to have a bus tour in Georgia because Democrats are actually presently suing Georgia GOP officials over election rules. Yeah, once again, comes down to Georgia. MSNBC has some interesting analysis on how Vice President Kamala Harris and Coach Walz are essentially flipping the script and targeting these pretty rural areas. The ones that Trumpty-Dumpty, a so-called billionaire who's never worked a day in his life and rips off people that live in those areas, yet convinces these fools to vote against their economic self-interest by stoking up hate, division, xenophobia, homophobia, misogyny, whatever. Anyway, so let's take a look at that.
And from a campaign perspective, Elise, you understand this part of the country. Obviously, we talk often about the fact that you're from Mississippi, not so far away from Georgia. And look, I think 1992 is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is Bill Clinton talked a lot about national security to those voters in southern Georgia, but also it was also breathtakingly close. I think 14,000 votes, fewer than 14,000 votes is what he won by. So how does a campaign best spend its time and money in an area like that?
Well, I've long said that Democrats should re-engage in rural America, that their neglect of rural America, especially in the South, has, these small margins. It really can make a difference. And the Georgia State GOP chair has said that in these counties, only 1% to 2% more participation by Republican voters could really give them a more comfortable margin for Donald Trump's victory. So anything Democrats can do to re-engage with rural voters, which include black voters, I think that people outside of the South often forget that there are plenty of rural black voters, too, that can be engaged in these areas. And I would actually hearken more to maybe 2012 and Barack Obama and getting low turnout voters who aren't necessarily coming out all the time, but getting them enthusiastic and channeling that enthusiasm. And it just helps so much down the ballot, too. And so that's kind of, if they can channel some of that enthusiasm, which is what we just saw in Priya's reporting, it's there. How do they put it to action?
Yeah. And Greg, we often talk about apples to apples, right? Which is one presidential campaign versus a previous presidential campaign. But as you rightfully point out in your recent writing, probably this campaign is taking more of the playbook from Raphael Warnock. Talk about that.
Yeah, and it's no surprise, too, because Who is one of Vice President Harris's top aides? It's Quentin Fulks. Quentin Fulks also ran the campaign for Senator Warnock 2 years ago. Senator Warnock, by the way, is from Savannah. And so part of that campaign's ethos, part of its very being, was going outside of Metro Atlanta. Of course, you have to drive up the score in Metro Atlanta. You can't win without that. But you also can't win in Georgia as a Democrat without also cutting into those Republican margins in other parts of the state. And that's how he narrowly defeated Republican Herschel Walker in a year that every other Republican statewide contender won, including Governor Brian Kemp. So he won with the help of those swing voters that voted for both Warnock and Kemp. And frankly, Vice President Harris will need that contingent of voters' help again, and many of them live outside of Metro Atlanta.
So I wonder what you're going to be watching for, Greg, when they make their trip and they go, and I know that you'll be talking to folks. What will give you an early indication that they're making some progress?
Well, activists and party leaders in this part of the state say they want to hear about Georgia's number one industry, which is agriculture. There hasn't been as much of that, obviously Metro Atlanta, it's not top of mind for so many people, but of course it is the number one industry in the state. And so they want to hear the plans from Vice President Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, on how they would propel the industry going forward. They also just like the attention because, again, this is a long neglected part of the state. Where not so long ago, even statewide contenders hardly came here. And now it is front and center.
And, Elise, Mike mentioned momentum, and that does allow you to do some things that let's say, the Biden campaign would not have been able to do. The Harris campaign actually did something similar to what they're doing in Georgia and Pennsylvania when they went to Beaver County. I think Trump won that by almost 20 points. So when you're talking about these places that are not used to getting presidential candidates, do you get some points for just showing up?
Absolutely. This is, in general, with the American political system, it kills me that so few states actually get attention within the country. And so spread out the love, engage everyone. And it shows that you think that rural voters matter, that going to where they are and meeting them and hearing their concerns. And I think that this is where the vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, is a great candidate to really engage. He's someone who rural voters can relate to. He reminds me of, a dad from home who can fix anything and isn't scared to wear his overalls and hang out and watch some football. And so it's just a more relatable look. It really helps her as a California prosecutor background to have someone like Walz who is from a more small town background.
Seems like Kamala Harris is playing 3D chess while Trumpty-Dumpty is lucky if he's playing checkers. Now, it's actually a brilliant campaign strategy for her to do this. One, she's doing considerably well in swing states. In fact, polling shows her perhaps leading, if not tied, with Trumpty-Dumpty in maggot laboratory states like Florida and North Carolina. So Joe Biden won Georgia, so it's important for her to go all around Georgia and not just Atlanta. But the second good thing about it is, it's going to piss off Trumpty-Dumpty, and he's going to have a full diaper after seeing it. Anyway, this is Really American. I am Michael Hayne. If you like our content, please hit that subscribe button and check me out on my latest TikTok account at Mike Hayne Comedian. Talk to you later.